Legends of Guatemala because I'm a student in Dr. Tolles' Spanish 321 class, and we were doing research, primarily research in that class, and this is the topic that I picked to present for Research Week because of that. And I've been on 3 different mission trips to Guatemala every summer for the past 3 years, and then this year I'll be going back for the whole summer with Liberty, so I'm really excited about that. So Legends of Guatemala, a stepping stone towards evangelism. That's my my title for this research. The purpose of this research. Why am I studying? Well, I kind of already gave you a little bit about it. The main reason that I chose this for my research and why I wanted to research about Legends of Guatemala, why do we need to know anything about Legends of Guatemala, is because Legends of Guatemala was spread all throughout Latin America and other parts of the world following its translation into other languages such as English and French, and then later on even more languages than that. This piece of literary history is important and relevant to us because it has had such an impact on people all around the world. If it's been translated into all these languages, we know it's really important. We know it's popular because, and it's important for us to know why. And then the second thing that I want to say for the purpose of this research is the publishing of these stories, which were previously passed down orally, caused them to become literary history that was solely based on the memory of Asturias. If something is solely based on the memory of someone else, then we should look at the academic repercussions for that. If you're going to tell a story orally, history orally, for all these many years, these stories which are told orally, and then put it in a book, and it's only told based on that book and the memory of Asturias, the memory that he had from his mother, telling him the stories, then we need to know the academic repercussions of that, and we need to research into that. The third point that I want to talk about for the purpose of the research is Legends of Guatemala describes the attitudes and behaviors of Guatemalan indigenous people in a way that can be compared and contrasted with those described in the Bible. And a commonality that I want to mention is one of the stories in Legends of Guatemala, because Legends of Guatemala, the book, is composed of many different stories, or kind of like folk tale, but it's like magical realism in the book. And one of the stories, which is called Leyenda del Volcán, which means Legend of the Volcano, there's a Mayan quote in it that says, "Destruction is always followed by rebirth." We can compare this to the Bible because in the Bible, bad things that happen to us, bad things always happen to us because we live in a fallen world. We can compare this to the story which says that destruction is always followed by rebirth because God always brings good out of all the bad that happens, and He always has a purpose for everything. So I think that this story and many other stories that are in the book which you could be used in evangelism while you're in Guatemala, because if you relate with the people, then that shows that you respect them and you care about them, and you'll be able to better evangelize the people of Guatemala. Questions of research. The questions that should be answered in this research study. How do Legends of Guatemala describe its indigenous people, and how does this understanding of Guatemalan indigenous people inform efforts towards evangelizing them? You cannot hit people over the head with the Bible, so to speak. You have to understand their culture. You have to know them. You can't just say, here's Jesus, you need to believe in Him to go to heaven, blah, blah, blah. They're not Americans. They're not like us. They're Guatemalan. You have to know their background. You have to research who they are as people. And knowing about their background, these stories, magical realism, will help us to understand it and their culture, which will help us in evangelizing. Number 2, what are the academic repercussions of making pieces of literature like Legends of Guatemala a part of history. Like I mentioned in the beginning, when you make literary history, this literary history is based off of the stories which were told orally to Asturias. His mother told him these stories. Now he's put them in a book. So now these stories are only based off of what he has put in this book, the version that his mother has given him. There are many academic repercussions to making a piece of literature as this one a piece of history. Number one that I would mention from this story is the fact that the book is only based on the memory from his mother. Number three, how do the behaviors expressed in Legends of Guatemala compare to those encouraged in the Bible? Three contrasts that I want to mention with the Mayan culture, behaviors expressed in these stories, and behaviors which are expressed in the Bible. One, human sacrifice. The Mayans were into human sacrifice, very much so, with their polytheism, multiple gods, which is the second I want to mention. Human sacrifice, we know that God is all about the sanctity of life and how that we should preserve life and cherish life. So that's a contrast. And then number two, polytheism. They sacrificed to their many gods. They did these human sacrifices to many gods. We only believe in one God as Christians. Number three is women's rights or polygamy. Having multiple wives, treating women as less. And we know that in the Bible, we're all equal as human beings, and God only, He only made us to have one mate, and it should be between a man and a woman. So that's another contrast. And now we're going to look at ways in which we'll investigate to answer these research questions. What do we need to research, and how are we going to research it to find the answers to these questions? We need to discover how Asturias, his early days, how did his early days bring him into contact with these indigenous people? He put these stories in his book, which are mainly based off of the Mayan people. So how can we know that Asturias had contact? He was born in Guatemala, but how do we know he had contact with Mayan people? Asturias grew up in Guatemala. His mother told him these stories. He came into contact, we know, with Guatemalan indigenous people as a little boy in a very small village that was filled with Mayan people and indigenous Guatemalan people. So that's when we know that he learned the stories and he had the contact with the people, which could have, I'm sure, inspired his future writing. Number two, we need to study the impression that the book, Legends of Guatemala, has had on its people, surrounding countries, and other parts of the world. After the publishing of this book, Legends of Guatemala was spread across the whole world. It was first translated into French, later English, and it's been translated into many other languages. I think it would be useful to study the impression that it's had on each, individual place. I'm sure it's had a separate impact on the Guatemalan people, the Mayan indigenous people, than it has on us, because we're not Guatemalan. We need to investigate ways in which one can use what they learned from the stories and legends of Guatemala to more successfully reach the Guatemalan people for Christ. I know there's a lot of people here at Liberty who have gone to Guatemala because of the Guatemala trip in the summer, and I plan on using this research to better relate to the Mayan people. There's still a lot of Mayan indigenous people in Guatemala. A large percentage of the Guatemalan people are Mayan. And I want to be able to use this research to better reach them for Christ and to be able to relate to their culture, to understand them better. And it shows that we care if we understand their culture more. Number four, we need to read, compare, and contrast the behaviors in the stories and legends of Guatemala against behaviors described in the Bible. How can you learn these stories? How can you learn these stories and then tell them to the Guatemalan people, use them to evangelize with the Guatemalan people? Well, I think the number one way is to learn what behaviors in the stories relate to behaviors in the Bible, and what contrasts, what are the differences, and show them, we know this is wrong because God says this in His Word, and we know this is right, this relates to something in the Bible, just like the destruction, rebirth comes from destruction. We can relate that to stories in the Bible and verses in the Bible. Just to close up, we're excited. I want to thank you all for letting me present and giving me the opportunity to be here today. And I hope that maybe this research could be a help to mission work around the world. That's my main goal, for it to help us reach Guatemalan people for Christ. And I plan on doing that this summer. So thank you.